I had the opportunity to go through Y-Combinator in 2011, and I'm here today to talk about a little bit about how I almost killed my startup. We were fortunate to see it through to an acquisition with Apple in the fall of 2013, but there was certainly a ton of bumps along the way. So I was going to walk through sort of a little bit of Embark's story, and then a couple of things that, when I talk to startups, come up as sort of common themes that people have trouble when they're making a couple decisions. So hopefully it's useful, and you guys can take something away from a few of our mistakes. So Embark was a mapping and routing company that specialized in sort of mobile and embedded devices. And the first product that we built around it was a series of routing apps designed some of the largest public transit systems in the world. So we had millions of users in New York and London and San Francisco and so on. So the way, a quick little timeline here, 2008, the first beta SDK of iOS came out, and a couple of my friends and I at USC, do I have any Trojans out there today, actually? Southern California? All right, fight on. So we were super excited to try out iOS, and this whole thing, like what's this App Store thing, and we can build stuff for the iPhone. That's really cool. So within 4 or 5 months, we put out the first version of our app, which was absolutely horrible, and it was called iBart. But we kind of leveraged the fact that we were one of the first 500 apps on the store, and that gave us a lot of just really fortunate, good timing press coverage, because people were like, hey, we're really excited about this whole new app model, and anytime anybody had any app with any users, you could get on TechCrunch and whatever. And so we were really fortunate to kind of come in right at the beginning of that and get a lot of initial traction. So I'd started it with a co-founder of mine who was a year behind me in school. So I graduated from USC, and I took my nice out-of-school job at Microsoft, and I was there for a total of 9 months before my co-founder David said, I'm getting ready to graduate. We've been working on this at night. We're getting a lot of good traction. Let's make a deal. We'll apply to YC. There's no chance we're going to get in. And if we do, you quit your nice job and leave your now wife and come down to Silicon Valley and make no money. And so, of course, 3 months later, we were in a really fortunate position, and we had an opportunity to go down and participate in Y-Combinator. My feeling was always that this was still under the rule of Paul Graham, and my feeling was always that he really didn't like us very much. I think he told us that actually several times. But we had a bunch of users, and he couldn't really argue with that. A couple months into the YC program, but Embark NYC was really our Eureka moment, our inflection point. We shipped something that was right before demo day. Really great uptake, tons of users in New York City subway, millions of users really quickly, and that was really the thing that kind of took us from little college side project to real business. Let's go raise some money and things like that. We really rode that wave a lot. We were fortunate that we were generating some revenue and really didn't have to go through the whole arduous process of raising a lot of millions and millions of dollars to go hire people. But we just kept growing and growing, and in the fall of 2013, we were approached by Apple, who had kind of a fallout in the map space with pulling Google Maps out of their standard distribution. So that was a really cool thing. And then, as Steve mentioned, I found myself a couple months ago back at Microsoft and working on some really cool things, which I'll talk about at the end here. So I promised a couple things that almost killed our startup, and really the first one was me having a full-time job. My mom insisted that was a tremendous thing, but from a startup's perspective, it was a very dangerous thing. For me, that job was at Microsoft, interestingly, and Microsoft's a fantastic place to work, but the crux of the matter is that it's really, really hard to build a company that you want to grow and treat as sort of a full-time venture when you're not full-time. And that seems really intuitive, but a lot of the startups I talk to, particularly in early stages, have this sort of very difficult decision to make that says, hey, I have an existing career, I have a family, I've got a lot of financial responsibilities, I have this app on the side that I work on at nights and weekends, or I have a friend who's kind of helping me out working quarter time. And more often than not, unfortunately, those startups have a really, really hard time growing into actual businesses. And so one of the frameworks that I've given to some startups that I've worked with is if you're thinking about a startup during the day, and this is something you work on your weekends and free time, in all likelihood, that means that the day job you currently have is probably not giving you everything you want. There's something about the job, you may even really like the job, but there's something that is not scratching that itch that you have as an entrepreneur. And that's something really, it took me a little while to really have sort of the introspection and realize that was true for me. But once you kind of get over that, you get to this conclusion. It's time to go for it. And everybody's got a different situation. Everyone's got, legitimate financial reasons and personal reasons. But I remember the day that I told Microsoft I was going to quit, and it felt like I was jumping out of a plane. It was a crazy rush. I was terrified. But just making that decision that I was going to go for it, cut the cord, and all of a sudden just realize that I was sort of in control of whether we were successful or not was just fantastic. And so I'm always an advocate of, if you are in any way in position to go do it and you have that itch and your job is not cutting it for you, just go take the plunge. There's, worst case is that you go learn a ton of stuff and have a really good time working hard and making no money. The second big thing that we had trouble with was not being able to tell our story, and that's largely from a consumer perspective. We were able, all four of us were CS guys. We were very technical. We did a lot of coding, and we were able to talk about the technology aspect of it all day. But from that pitch that said, this is why it's a really great thing, this is why people are going to want it, this is how we can make money, we were terrible at that, honestly, out of the gate. In fact, here's actually probably the quote from Paul Graham that stayed with me the most. We were prepping for demo day on our first pass, and he stopped us in the middle of a 2.5-minute pitch and said, guys, there's nothing investable here. He just said, throw it out, go start from the whiteboard all over again. There's nothing that you guys just said in the way you framed your story that would convince an investor to give you money. Luckily, that turned out not to be true, but it took a lot of work to get there. And one of the things, when I meet a startup for the first time and they kind of pitch me their idea, one of the litmus tests that I give them is, think about having 30 seconds. YC's a little longer, we get 2.5 minutes. I know a lot of accelerators have 5 or 10-minute pitches, but think about that 30-second window. If you can get across what you're doing, why you think it's going to be huge, and why your team is awesome, and you're the team to go do it, that's a really, really effective and fantastic platform. And a lot of people hit one or two or none of these things, but it's very rare the first time that I meet a startup that I see somebody that hits on all 3 of these things in that first 30 seconds. And that's a really, it's a really challenging thing to do, to develop your pitch to get there, but it's super, super valuable. It's the pitch you give, to the person in the elevator. It's a pitch you give to the person you meet at a bar. It's a pitch you give to your aunt when you see her for the first time after 8 years. You have to be able to tell the story, and you should take every single opportunity you have to practice getting that right. The last thing that I'll talk about today, and I think this is applicable to tons of people in this room, is we almost died by being really, really afraid to ship. And one of the things that I've kind of coined as the curse of the entrepreneur is there's a particular type of personality in this room. A lot of people here have been really successful in different aspects of life. You're go-getters, you have a very high quality bar for yourself, and part of that makes it really difficult to open yourself up to criticism. There's not a lot of people in the room that willingly say, hey, let me go put myself out there and put something out there that's not complete and not perfect and doesn't match my vision, and let people go try it. And the reality of the matter is, in a startup where you have limited resources, the biggest ROI, the biggest, most valuable single thing you can do is to get it in the hands of customers, because they give you free feedback and they say, hey, this was the vision that it seems like you had, but this is actually how we want to go use the product, and this is the magical part of the product. And if you spend too long inside your internal box with your own perception of what the product is, a la Windows 8, you wind up with something that doesn't you wind up with something that doesn't necessarily match what customers really need. And so the big thing I try to preach, and it's something I've had to work on myself a lot, is ship whenever there's new value. And a lot of people talk about MVPs. I like to talk about MMPs, which I consider sort of the minimum magical product, or the minimum marginal product. And it's the realization that a great product, if it's really a super product, if it's something like a Square, that product's never done. It keeps evolving, it keeps changing, and getting it into people's hands is the single most important thing you can do to make sure that you're really delivering on what your users want. And so this is the biggest thing. People come to me and they're like, hey, I'm planning for this launch and I don't know when to do it and the product's not ready. And ask yourself what launch really means. We launched Embark, I can't tell you how many times we put it on Hacker News, got no hits, changed, iterated on the title a little bit, opened up a new account and posted it the next day, right? And when you're a startup, you actually have the luxury of no one knows who you are. And so there's really no penalty or cost for putting yourself out there. And the only thing that can happen is that people give you sort of course correcting information, which is super, super valuable. So those were 3 tips, and I'm going to open up the floor for some questions in a minute. But I wanted to talk about a question that I think a bunch of people have asked me today, and that's, how does somebody that goes through YC and works through a whole startup and had a really positive experience with it, was fortunate enough to do that, how do they end up at the big, giant Microsoft after all that's said and done? And when I joined Azure at the end of November last year, I really had no intention of going back to Microsoft, quite honestly. And I had the opportunity to meet with a very small, what we're calling ourselves sort of the rogue group of ninjas at Microsoft that are trying to turn Microsoft and Azure into the best Linux platform that's out there. And the first time I heard that pitch, I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I think this was right before Satya had the public announcement with the big sign, Microsoft loves Linux. But the appetite for looking at what developers are doing, looking at what you guys are doing, making sure that we realize where there's gaps in the Azure platform, we go and monitor what open source tools you guys are using, what you need to be successful. That was crazy. We've got a big partnership with Docker, and I think the first day I was working with them, I was on the phone with those guys. It was just a completely different culture, and one that was really advocating, let's go help developers run the best tools, and not just the ones that are Microsoft tools, which has really been our traditional approach. The biggest piece of benefit that we're getting with engaging in startups is hearing that feedback. And the great thing about working with you guys is when I go and talk to a huge enterprise customer or government customer, it takes like 3 months for us to give them something and design a POC and go through that whole process before they ever give us any feedback. And what we're trying to do increasingly in Azure is to do just what I advised a couple minutes ago, ship whenever we think there's meaningful value added. And so the reason we're working with really cool accelerators like this and really cool startups like you guys is so that we can get that feedback almost instantly and help us shape the direction of the platform and make sure we're on track. And so this is a little cheesy here, and it's meant to be, but the reason that I actually landed with Microsoft and back at Azure was we're really thinking about ourselves internally and culturally as the cloud startup. We want to work with the best folks out there. We want to work with the next generation of developers, and so we're doing something that doesn't scale for lots of accelerators and startups. And that's essentially providing a direct line into engineering. So that's my personal email at Microsoft. And any startup that's in here that has questions about Azure, how to get going, what we offer, Linux questions, Windows questions, whatever you guys have, feel free to ping me, and we will get you connected to the right person. We want to make sure that we're helping you guys build the best cloud solution, even if that's not 100% Azure. And so that's all I had today. I want to say thank you again for having me out, and to Eureka for having me over here today. And that's my Twitter handle if you guys want to say hi. So thank you.